where I come from, everything is currency. Everything is what? No money to pay fees, no problem. As long as you have maize, beans, potatoes, trees, milk, all in the hope that you won't milk all that you have and leave nothing for your family. And my folks were no different. But it got to a point where they could only produce for us. And now, my father turned to something else. As I mentioned, where I come from, everything is what? Everything is currency. So my dad started cutting trees to pay my school fees. And in no time, my home didn't feel like a home. And one day I asked my mom, why does dad cut these trees? And of course, I expected an answer like, to pay your school fees, you ungrateful kid. But that wasn't the response. So my mom told me, the damage has already been done, and nobody is coming to restore your home. Nobody is coming to do what? To restore your home. And she gave me a challenge. Every time you come back home, plant at least 2 trees. And that's what I've been doing. And I have been restoring my home. That's where you clap. In the spirit of restoration, restoring our land, restoring our bodies. One more time, turn to your neighbor and ask them. I know it's just after lunch. Ask them, what do you enjoy eating the most? Ask your neighbor. I know you're all saying your traditional foods. That's enough. Thank you. By a show of hands, if your neighbor said plastics, kindly put your hand up. Oh, your neighbor enjoys eating. Then what makes you think that our land enjoys eating plastics? Our land's diet is not plastics. Then why? Why do you eat your food and drop your plastic and walk away with a plastic smile after dropping your baggage garbage on this land that cannot speak for itself? Why? Why do you allow your kids to unwrap their sweets and drop the wrappings? Somebody tell me why. Why is mental health so important to us? But we keep stressing our land. Our land is at our mercy. And all we are doing is getting our phones out and recording the last moments of its existence. Somebody tell me why. How do you expect to heal when you're hurting the healer? How do you expect to find peace while all you're creating is chaos? Garbage in is now outing on us. Blood is oozing from the trees that we cut. Cut! This is not a movie. We need action. Imagine a world full of cities and towns, but no monkeys chattering. Masai Mara, Serengeti full of skulls and degradation. Climate is changing. And this is not a trend. We are treading on a minefield and there's nothing, and I mean nothing, there's nothing left to mine but ourselves. Stampedes left, right, and center as we are trying to run for solutions. We need to be more intentional. I would be so ashamed to see any of you here littering. When you go out there, we need to be the ones who are holding people accountable. When you see someone dropping a plastic, ask them, how would you feel if someone handed you this and told you, enjoy your lunch? My name is Wangoi Kemani. And go forth and be responsible human beings. Thank you.
Wow. I don't know if you can feel it through your body. Yes, right? What an incredible opportunity to sit with the responsibilities that we have. But also what we really want to do in this session is to sit with some of the tensions that exist and that may not come up in conversations at conferences when we all say things where we agree with each other. But there's very real pain, there's very real conflict that is at the heart of the work that we all do and of the ambitions that we have when we say inclusive restoration. So this session is about whose knowledge counts. How do we bridge different domains, lived experiences, wisdoms, realities in practice? So we have a quick moment. I want to hear from the audience. When you hear the word knowledge, what comes to mind? Feel free to just shout it out. What comes to mind? Power, care, freedom, responsible, awareness, keeping, gatekeeping. Yes, and that's a critical part of the conversation we're going to have. Who are the gatekeepers? Who decides what's credible knowledge? Who decides, whether something's valuable or not? What's discarded and thrown away, and what makes it into those policy statements and legislation? So knowledge exists in many forms. It's passed down through the oral traditions Wangui talked about. We have the satellite-powered maps. We have the lived experience of young leaders we've heard about. And this session is really looking at some of our big, bold initiatives. We have the Great Green Wall. We've got, AFR 100, Regreening Africa. How does it look to really do that in a way that honors multiple knowledge systems? So I'd love for the QR code to come up for those online and those in the room to quickly answer the question, what comes to your mind? And we'll come back to that when we have our panel today. So I want to start off first by, when we're talking about knowledge, we have to root it in some sense of evidence. What does evidence mean to different people in the room? We're here at a research and development organization. I'm sure there's different understandings. So we want to start with a video by Stephanie Mansourian, who's going to introduce some of the work that's been done over the past year, really looking at how is evidence used in restoration efforts as an anchoring for us to start our conversation with. So I'd like to play the video now and we can come back to the results.
Hello everyone, I'm Stephanie Mansourian and it's my pleasure on behalf of my co-authors to introduce this insight brief on evidence and ecosystem restoration, insights and recommendations. The question we sought to answer through this brief was how is evidence being used and integrated into ecosystem restoration processes, and how can it be better used to inform and improve restoration action at scale? The scope of the brief is terrestrial landscapes with a focus on the Global South, and our audiences are UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration partners, restoration implementers, policymakers and funders. To carry out this research, we interviewed 12 people representing 6 categories of organizations: humanitarian organizations, those working in rural development, conservation, carbon brokers, restoration funders, and representatives of community-based organizations. We also carried out a literature review and a review of existing restoration initiatives and used our combined experience and insights. So what is evidence in ecosystem restoration? Evidence can be understood as the diverse sources of data and knowledge that help to assess progress, but also to identify opportunities or challenges and to define future interventions. Evidence is relevant at all stages of the restoration process, from fundraising, planning, through to implementation, right through to learning and disseminating. And it's relevant to all approaches to restoration. So how is evidence obtained in ecosystem restoration? Well, evidence can be obtained through technological means like drones, like satellite images, but also through surveys, through interviews. But importantly, it can also be obtained through indigenous knowledge, through images, through experiences, observation, oral tradition, ancestral knowledge. So although evidence is central to decision making, we actually found that it remains vastly underutilized in ecosystem restoration. What is being used as evidence is basically focused on scientific methods to a certain extent, on just a handful of technologies. I mentioned drones and satellite images, very much a focus on biophysical processes and short-term evidence, as well as an emphasis on activity and output measures. In contrast, there's much less evidence being collected through indigenous and local knowledge and experience, through a more diverse source of evidence. There's much less evidence being collected on socioeconomic processes, much less long-term data being collected, and much less data on impacts rather than activities and outputs. So some key take-home messages include that it is really important to contextualize evidence. So what works in the forests of Vietnam might not work in the Atlantic forest of Brazil. There's also growing recognition that a combination of knowledge sources and documentation can contribute to strengthen that body of evidence that can be used to determine future restoration actions. But several challenges were identified through our brief. I just list a handful here. The rigidity of the project design and difficulties in scaling up is a major challenge. There's a limited scope in terms of data collected, data aggregation, availability, and access. There's a dissonance between the data that's available and local priorities for decision making. The capacity to collect and integrate evidence is still not strong enough. We conclude our issues brief with 7 recommendations. The first is the importance of enhancing adaptive or iterative management in ecosystem restoration. Secondly, it's important to broaden that evidence base to integrate socioeconomic and biophysical data, but also indigenous local practitioner knowledge together with scientific evidence. It's important to engage donor and investor responsibility so that they can create better conditions to enhance evidence integration. So that means longer-term projects, longer-term support for restoration, as well as more financial means to collect data that's necessary. Strengthening multi-stakeholder platforms that can identify and collect evidence that is locally relevant. It's important also to institutionalize a learning culture so that there is more desire, more capacity, and more willingness to share and to learn from others' experience. It's also important to strengthen the capacity to collect, analyze, and interpret data and knowledge. And finally, we suggest the importance of investing in stakeholder engagement processes to integrate diverse evidence sources that will help inform policy making and practice in restoration. So I encourage you to download the insight brief on the C4ICRAF website and hope you'll enjoy reading it. Thank you.
Brilliant. What I find really interesting about what we just heard is that the system that we operate in and work within doesn't reflect those incredible aspirations that we're talking about around community and our values and having really inclusive approaches to implementation. But rather, you're seeing the impact of short-term versus long-term, something we criticize the economic system for, but somehow are reproducing in our project-driven approach to restoration. The disconnect between local priorities and evidence. And is it really evidence, and is this the way forward if there is a clash with local priorities? So there's a lot that underplays the conversations that we talk about, and I'm always surprised at how many words we can use to describe something that is very felt and known, and that Wangui inspired in all of us, being able to share with one another the things that we enjoy and to share that sense of responsibility that we all have. So I want to have an opportunity now to invite one of our speakers who's online. She's joining us as from the African Union Commission, and all of our wonderful restoration ambitions and plans, they're all there. You had an opportunity to hear from Stephanie, but you also had that inspiring moment that we started off with. So Leah is a senior policy officer at the African Union, and we'd love to hear from you just on how this resonates.
Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting the African Union Commission to this crucial discussion, especially as we are now moving on to the implementation of the new AU Great Green Wall Strategy. As we know, this strategy and the Great Green Initiative is all about ecosystem restoration and also for ecosystem restoration and livelihood resilience. So based on the video that we just seen and also the conversations that have been going on, on the data, of course, most of the time, for example, we look at the objective of the Great Green Wall Initiative, and the objective was to restore 100 million hectares, for example, of degraded land and to sequester some 250 million tons of carbon to combat climate change, etc., and create jobs. But how are we collecting this data? How do we know we've reached these targets? Who's the owner of the data? How do we trust this data? Because, of course, reports have been done on the achievements or lack of achievements of the initiative. And, of course, it has been critical to integrate this process as we move on to the implementation of this new strategy. For example, I think the presenter or the video just highlighted different ways, for example, and I think the moderator as well, who was asking whose knowledge counts. Is it the knowledge we are getting from the IT and all the satellite images showing the transformation over time? Is it maps? Is it tree counters? Because when we engage our partners, they always ask, where is the evidence? Where is this wall of trees, for example, that you've been planting since 2007? But how is this data being who's feeding it, etc.? Of course, other initiatives are counters, and that's the technology part of it. Do we count on the indigenous and local knowledge? We know our communities have this information. They have been restoring land for years and know what works, what doesn't work. But again, this particular group has been ignored for some time, but I think we are waking up to the reality that they know how the system works, they know how their climate works, and what has been changing over the years. Of course, the proposal to broaden the evidence base and include multiple stakeholders, that's something which is integrated in the Great Green Wall Strategy. And projects like Regreening Africa, for example, have been using technology to track progress, inform decision-making, and they have been trying to push the AU also to do its part and make the adjustments wherever possible based on this data being collected. Again, the other thing that we learned is the challenges which were presented as well. For example, the rigidity of the project description. Sometimes to implement projects, we have to go through these rigorous frameworks, and that, of course, is a challenge when you want to report on the information. And the data also, like sometimes we don't have the data, or again, it comes back to who owns the data, who's producing the data. Do you have to pay for the data? And this has been a challenge, at least in the implementation of some of these large restoration projects. The proposal for sharing continuous learning, of course, for the Sahel region, they started the implementation of the Great Green Wall Initiative earlier. So now we have the SADC region also having their Great Green Wall Initiative inspired by the Sahel one. And lessons could be exchanged on what has worked in the Sahel, what did not work, so that the SADC region can borrow from that. But also there are realities, and that also came up as we design these projects. The context is different. So they could also share experiences and exchange knowledge with the Sahel. I think I'll stop there. I was strictly told to not overspeak. So I'll respect that request. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. I really appreciate it. A round of applause. Yes, I have told my speakers I will be ruthless. So I'd love to invite my panelists to this stage. We want to now have a bit of a conversation on what this looks like in practice. We brought up a lot of questions, but what does it mean when we're starting to work on the ground? So Mawa and Joshua, if you could join me on stage, and then we have Alexi joining us online. And then I'm going to open the floor to you. So I would really reflect on what your experiences are, what your perspectives are, and we'll finalize with the conversation with the audience. Okay, and then can I ask for you to bring the results back up? Because when we started, we asked the audience, what comes to mind when you hear the word knowledge? And I've asked the panelists to bring an object that represents their knowledge system. So we can already see power is probably the biggest one. Freedom, wisdom, integrity, humility. So I want to turn to you, Mawa, first. What is your object and what does it tell us about the way you look at knowledge and restoration?
Thank you, Salina. Let me look for my small object. Okay, this is my object. I couldn't bring it from Burkina Faso, but I got it here from Kenya, which is also considered my home. So the object is a leaf, and it really speaks to diversity, complementarity, and humility. And if you look at the nuances in the colors, you will see that it symbolizes the diversity and the complementarity of the stewards of a leaf, and also the diversity of the knowledge systems that was required for the leaf to be and prosper. It also symbolizes the diversity of benefits that people and nature can have from that. For example, you will see that farmers may have traditional knowledge, or what is called traditional knowledge, that can be backed up by scientists and technicians who can also make research to improve a species and help them adapt to climate change. Practitioners and policymakers and decision makers could then work on enabling environment that will ensure that the leaf prosper and gives what it was meant for nature and for the people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mal.
Yes,
I'm going to stop
thank
you
you.
there because we still have a little time. I want to turn to Alexi online. Can you hear us? Can you show us what is your object? He's a forest governance specialist joining from Tree 8. Hello.
Hello.
All right, what is your object?
Oh, thank you. My objects. Do you see my object is too small, small one?
We can see it.
That's, yeah. It is a shanat.
Brilliant.
I
We can see
have
it.
it in my hand. That is a shanat.
Wonderful.
Okay.
What does it mean to you? How does that describe your
Yeah.
knowledge system?
Exactly. For me, shanat, this nut comes from shea tree, which is a very important place for the community in West Africa, particularly in Burkina Faso, in terms of social, economic, and environment aspects. This object represents all the community's knowledge on landscape restoration, forest product value chain, and also the link between the both. About knowledge and restoration, particularly, this object teaches us that community's knowledge is very capital for landscape restoration and community well-being, particularly the women in my country, Burkina Faso.
Love that. Wonderful to hear about that, how that symbolizes women. We have Joshua here as well. Where is your object?
Actually, I was to bring a cow, one elephant, but it happened that the regulation will not allow me. Well, I was thinking what I should bring, then I thought of bringing a picture that shows an immense knowledge that has been keeping my people and many indigenous people on their landscapes. As you can see, the indigenous people, particularly those on the dry land, they have been living their life for generations, overcoming the challenges and uncertainty, just because of the simple knowledge, not superstition, but the simple knowledge of understanding the environment. The top picture is an elder reading a goat's intestines to predict the rains of that year. Just a simple thing as observing the goat's intestine, they can know if it will rain or not. It is the same with observing the movement and migration of certain animals. It's the same as observing the voice or listen to the voices and voices of the birds. They can determine the kind of the year with the ways of that year. But not only that, it is also all about, for example, for the Maasai, we know how to coexist with nature for so long. We know when to graze our cattle, at what time, and how we can coexist with wildlife. One big example is during the breeding of the wildebeest, our cattle have to move from the mountain, the places where the wildebeest not to be there. It is not for the wildebeest to be safe because we don't hunt, it is the norms. But it is for them, it is also safer for our cattle. So that kind of the knowledge is what in most cases have been despised and renamed by the scientists just to put it to look more scientific. The traditional grazing system rotation, they call it regenerative grazing. Of course, it is a regenerative, but they call it the multi-paddock system, which is a traditional system been used for years. They don't want to credit those societies. And it is what you see down there. So I hope my object is much more sufficient than elephant.
Beautiful. Absolutely love it. And I love what you're bringing up because so many times we have all this terminology that comes. Sometimes I wonder if the business of the scientists is to, just harvest and then create a new name for something that people have known for centuries. So Mawa, working at C4ECRAF here, what happens when knowledge systems clash? Where you've got the scientific, you've got local traditions. How did Regreening Africa move from conflict to co-creation? What are some real honest lessons that you can share with us?
Yeah, let me be honest. When knowledge system clash, you may have inappropriate policies, practices, laws and regulation that can misplace or ignore even people's agencies. And this can deliver unjust and unsustainable resources management, ineffective restoration efforts, and unjust benefits sharing schemes. Then co-creation becomes really a matter of social justice, a necessity to advance and address complex environmental and human challenges. We saw the word power earlier. So power is at the heart of the concept of knowledge because knowledge is based on our worldviews, our beliefs, and also our influences. And knowledge is, when it's crafted as evidence, it can be used to build, to convey, and to legitimize certain narratives as compared to others. If we have time, I will give some more examples. Otherwise, I will go straight into what the Regreening Africa program has done.
Very briefly, yeah.
Very briefly, yeah. So the Regreening Africa program is a large-scale restoration program that is implemented across the Sahel and the Horn of Africa as a contribution to the Great Green Wall initiative that they mentioned earlier. So the Regreening Africa program was recognized as a UN Decade World Restoration flagship, and it's funded generously by the European Union and implemented by C4ECRAF and its partners, World Vision, CRS, Sahel-ECO, and AVSF. Within the Regreening Africa program, we use a tailored approach to stakeholder engagement with evidence so that multiple knowledge sources, such as science, for example, the monitoring results of trees, species, and land health information could be combined with community insights and also practitioner experience so that we were able to create a safe space, which is very important, and for dialogue and iterative decision-making. So this approach has helped us to contribute in shifting the decision culture and evidence-based adaptive management within the program as well. So the lesson from that application includes the importance of skilled engagement specialists. That's very important. And skilled facilitators also. So the need for co-creation of knowledge has also been highlighted, and the role of trust and safety. To just conclude, I saw you tapping in your mic. These soft skills and processes are often overlooked in restoration space and processes, but they can be really critical for success and ensuring impact from community implementation. So if we have more time, I can give more field examples.
Brilliant. No, it's really interesting to hear this from you. I remember the first time I heard about stakeholder engagement with evidence, and I always thought it was we gather the communities to look at our data and help them make better decisions. But what you're saying is really shifting into a new culture, evidence including more than scientific information, and having that conversation that shifts kind of that paradigm. I'd like to kind of bring up one of the, I don't know, a hot topic issue, which is like carbon investments, carbon projects. You know, we talk about private investment into landscape restoration. What happens when that approach, which relies on measurable outcomes and maybe doesn't value community and indigenous perspectives in the same way? When pressure for, you know, private sector investment comes in, how do we build a system and a project and design it in a way that gets the information required, that roots it in a different kind of way of operating? So I want to invite Alexi back, because you've done some work really looking at carbon projects in West Africa and Burkina. So in your work setting up the carbon project, how did you reimagine kind of the existing paradigm to do something differently? And what guidance does that offer the restoration community as we look to scale investment?
Thank you a lot, Salina. I am a forest governance expert, and I coordinate currently in innovative carbon project called Tontenga in More. That's one major local language. Based on my own experience, what I would like to highlight, to take away, to recognize and put communities' knowledge in the center of restoration. First,
Alexi, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but is it possible that you can turn the camera on, or is the connection not strong enough?
Yeah, my connection is not very good here.
Okay,
But
right,
if I can try to
no
see.
worries, no worries. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. First, the foundation, the base of restoration project is to build a community-led forest governance by support these communities to organize themselves. That is the first thing, and to develop the forest management tools. And one example to have and to share is the local management charter. This charter contains communities' needs and their knowledge on restoration. In our case, we formalized with the communities the good practices like half moons, Zai pits. These techniques exist in the past before our project. And through all the governance tools, we can now recognize and have a more easy scaling up of these techniques. Second, the long-term collaboration is very essential to generate the deep trust. We work closely with communities during 17 years to establish a deep sense of trust and a very strong forest governance model. I think MAWA have a good experience also in this model, because we built this model with all the actors of this project, which creates an enabling environment where communities' knowledge and trust grow. These two elements were seen also by the investor as a de-risking strategy. And as the result, we scale restoration through our new carbon projects. And this project become in the world the first very new high integrity carbon methodology.
Wow, so what I'm hearing is really, you see, if there's enough intention, if the governance element is really deeply addressed and there's long-term engagement that's been there, that there is a way that you're seeing really credible carbon projects come online in a way that values, I guess the aspirations that we all hold. So the last question I'm going to ask our panelists before I open it up to the audience, this is for Joshua. What does meaningful integration of diverse knowledge actually look like? You told us some of the, what it looks like in your community, how it can be distorted when others come in and try to learn and then transmit that knowledge out. So can you give us an example of what meaningful integration looks like?
Thank you, Salina. I usually tell people that we have much to learn from the community than to teach. And it is because of their own experience that we have been coming across on our implementation of the programs. I'm lucky that I've been into the AI with the grazing. We're still working on that. I've been on carbon, I've been on restoration. And as we have heard in the morning here with Misati explaining about the issues in restoration of mangrove, that the communities are needed, I think there is also an immense knowledge that science can learn from indigenous knowledge systems. For example, we have been in Mercy Step with us, say we have been planting trees. And sometimes this question came into mind while working with them, is we have this agenda of growing 1 million trees maybe for certain years. Where will you grow it? Sometimes people might take trees and go and grow and want to plant them on the grassland, which was never meant for trees, it is for grassland. Then we have, you might also maybe think, for example, back in my home, we have a program, one of the partners have a program where they're clearing the forest, the shrubs. People might say these guys are crazy, but the only way for the grassland to sprout is to make sure that the grass have room to grow. But we can't get that from science, because for them, 30 by 30 plan is to make sure that we conserve 30% of the world by 2030. That is all their agenda. But also working with AfriScout, which is a technology where we are using AI into guiding people where to graze. But we have went more than just providing information for them. We have sat down with them and create a system where they can now digitalize the traditional grazing system of rotation. The aim is to restore the rangeland. And from there, the communities are the ones who are taking the lead. For us, just to make sure that those plans of theirs have to be digitalized and make sure that the AI is telling them, this is the size of the grass, this centimeter, you should stop grazing here. But they have been doing this. With that same application, we are creating that the background that we can also allow the community to share some of the alert. For example, we have been, back then in my community, just very short, it was last week I was at the village. And I met 2 farmers, Mercy and our farmers, of course, they are pastoralists now. And one of them this year did not grow. He usually grow beans, but this year, no, he went for maize. The rest of the people who grow beans, all of them went down on that landscape. Then they asked him, how did you know that? And usually, how did you know that this year is not good for beans? He just went. I just knew. I looked into the very beginning of the year. I saw the amount of the rain that has rained that year. I also saw that there are certain kind of the trees when they sprout the flowers. He knows that the rain is not suitable for beans this year. So we have more to learn from the community. So let's not undermine undermine each other. I think there is a way that we can exist. It doesn't mean that science have to replace indigenous knowledge. Neither does indigenous knowledge have to kick out science. We can coexist.
I love that. And I love what you've also said, which is you're using technology and AI to, in fact, reinforce traditional knowledge. And so is it really clashing knowledge systems, or can there be a different way? So now you've been listening and we get to hear from you. So the question we have for the audience is, what is one shift that we need to make within ourselves, our institutions, or our policies to truly honor and act on multiple knowledge systems? So if I can ask my panelists, let's go to the audience with our mics and see what your answer is. So does anyone want to go ahead and start? What's one shift that you think we'd need to make to truly honor and act on multiple systems?
Okay, mine is I'm seeing from a perspective of merging the two, whereby now science tend to listen to what community or other indigenous knowledge have. Because I'm also looking at a perspective whereby the young people may not be able to learn from the older folks, whereby it comes at times, especially now that we're told in Africa, the young people at a higher level, or rather the bigger percentage. So who will be able to track down what our indigenous communities are doing in terms of the knowledge that they have? If, for example, those kids in our schools right now, they are learning more on the science from the books rather than engaging with one-on-one with the elderly people in their communities. So I'm looking from a perspective of merging the two. Why can't we also link up and document what these communities are doing for the better of our future? Yeah, so that's my take.
Love that.
Yeah.
And do you know where your neighbor is from?
My name is Margaret. I work for the African Wildlife Foundation. I'm a senior officer conservation education. I basically work with the young people, children in the schools in Savo, age group of 7 to 17 years. So I'm speaking from experience.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Do you mind passing the mic down the road and let's see what... Yeah.
Hi. So for me, I'm looking at a situation whereby like, even as much as we have the knowledge being cascaded down to the farmers, we look at some points, not all the farmers will have maybe the knowledge with the AI tools and all that, but we can also use our telcos, whereby the government, there's a connection between like the government can work hand in hand with our telcos to probably like pass some information when it's a certain season that something like maybe some crops cannot be planted, just to be a reminder to the people who have not necessarily the phones that are the usual that they can use, like the big phones down here in Kenya, we call them mulika mwizi, the small phones, just a message to just pass the information to them and let them know that this particular season is not right for you to do the planting, but at the end of the day, the information will get to many more maybe farmers, as opposed to just relying on maybe somebody who has a tech phone that has all the app and they don't have the same.
No, I love that. So the one shift of really integrating technology in a way to enhance accessibility.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Anyone else in that section that wants to? Yes.
Right here. So it's breaking the silos and striving to learn what others are doing. So we educate ourselves first before we prescribe, before we, conclude that my approach is the best. If I am within a certain landscape, it is my responsibility to educate myself. If I am an institution, learn about you, and then, as the panelist described, strive to strike a balance and align.
Yeah, I think that resonates with something that someone in the audience said. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so listen more than you talk. So we heard from 3 women. Is there 1 man, just to balance this one out? Yes, okay, Amos.
Yeah, thank you. I think we sometimes overly tend to glorify the methodology of obtaining knowledge, And because, you know, scientific methods are quite rigorous and we attach so much value to this rigor, we tend to use that to downplay indigenous knowledge or other forms of knowledge that seemingly do not have this rigor, you know, the methodological rigor through which they come to space. And that is why many times we get cases of biopiracy happening where scientists or other stakeholders go and interact with these indigenous communities and they pirate the knowledge. And then they put those through rigorous, you know, methodological systems, document it and bring it to the fore. And I think if we ascribe value to indigenous knowledge without necessarily, or while respecting the methods through which they acquire those knowledges, it's a way in which we start to honor multiple knowledge systems.
Brilliant. I absolutely love that. There's knowledge and there's also knowing and, you know, being able to hold both and not overprescribe everything. So I want to, there's so much more we could talk about, but I don't have the time. And so I want to invite our CEO, Eliane, to just share some brief reflections, anything that you heard that is staying in your mind. What is one shift that you think you'd like to see? The floor is yours.
I just want to first say that I'm so thankful for this session because part of the issue we have is whose knowledge is valued and how does that translate into how we vote, how we finance change, and how we take data into knowledge and information and transform that into wisdom for the future. And so the big issue is really around, can we be comfortable or uncomfortable enough to create a space where we're designing a future where we know that emergence requires us to hold on to uncertainty while we hold on to the knowledge we have, but also be aware that there are knowns that are known, there are knowns that are unknown, there are unknown knowns, and somehow we need to figure out how to advance in the future. And so one of the difficulties about this is we need to hold our collective anxiety. And that's not about marginalizing or scapegoating. And it's often the people who are troublemakers that hold information that we need. And often we do not create that space of inner discomfort to listen twice as much as we talk. And so I want to just say how thankful I am to the participants of this panel, because this is a really critical subject. Because one of the things that I think about a lot is around indigenous wisdom and how we hold 7 generations, whether it's us as the generation and 3 generations back and 3 generations forward, or think us and 6 generations forward. But the whole idea is to hold this idea that we do not hold all of the knowledge. And so no matter what you know, always allow the space of doubt to inform you on what can emerge that you do not know yet. Thank you.